really excited to talk about today's topic. I don't know how much, most of you may not know that much about me, so I will share little tidbits of myself throughout this. But really, today's talk is not for me at all. It is for you. And let's go ahead and um, get into this. I want to also welcome you to type your questions in the chat box at any time. Like I said, this is meant to be of value to you. So today I'm going to be talking about how to foster intergenerational relationships between students and their grandparents. Throughout our time tonight, I am going to tell you how to foster those relationships, but I'm going to first touch on what your role is in your family. I want to just really briefly cover the benefits of intergenerational relationships, because I think people often say that they are beneficial, but we don't really go too deep into that. I want to give you a helpful reminder so that you don't give up in the middle of all this. And then I'm going to go over some of the common mistakes that we make when we are trying to help the young and older generations connect, and really what you can do. And then I'll give you kind of a next step of what you can do next. So I want to ask you first, as we get into this, which role applies to you. I want to know who you are, what brought you to this, what made you interested about tonight's topic. And so if you can just type into the chat box, are you a grandparent? Are you I didn't expect grandchild, but maybe you are a grandparent, a parent, a grandchild. Okay, so we've got mostly parents, I'm guessing. All right. And so I will be talking about this mainly as addressing parents, but this can also be, what you're learning about today. I think it's also helpful for grandparents to understand this. I think for older grandchildren, it's also valuable to know this too. So some people may overlap and be a grandchild and a parent as well. So really, when it comes to your role, the way that I see intergenerational relationships is that the parent, especially, but also whoever else is in the middle, is the connector. Okay, so I want you to think of yourself as the playmaker, the connector. And a good example way to help you understand this is all of you have kids. And if you just think of when they were young, or maybe they are still young, think of two kids on the playground, and one of them is your child, and you're trying to help them to make friends with other kids on the playground. In that instance, you're the connector, and so you can play a role in helping to facilitate, to help them develop a closer relationship with other kids on the playground, to help them make friends, right? So as a parent, that's what I want you to see as your role, and there's a lot that you can do. So I just want to give you a little bit of background about myself. My name's Isabel Tom, as Evelyn had mentioned, but I'm the author of a book called The Value of Wrinkles, A Young Perspective on How Loving the Old Will Change Your Life. I'm also the creator of the Grandkid Investigator kit and camps. And basically the perspective that I'm coming from today comes from my experience. I tell people that I'm a retired grandchild. I grew up in MCPS schools and all throughout, and I grew up in a multi-generational household. So I am Chinese, I speak Cantonese, and I grew up with my mama and yaya. So in Cantonese, that refers to your paternal grandparents. And so all throughout, from elementary school, middle school, high school, sometimes I felt like I was a little bit different because I didn't really have friends who had their grandparents who were living with them. And so I know in this county, we have a lot of families that are, you may be, actually let me know in the chat if you are in the sandwich generation. You're caring for, I'm guessing if you came today, you're caring for an older loved one, and then you also are caring for kids. So for me, if you talk about that sandwich, I was at one of the sandwiches I was sandwiching my parents in. And my dad was the eldest son. And so it was really culturally, it was a huge part of his role to care for my grandparents. And they came over to the US from Hong Kong before I was born. So they'd always been there. Another part of my perspective is once I had kids, my role as a grandchild was a huge part of my life, but I also have been a caregiver. So my dad, um, whose parents that lived with us, he passed away after his dad passed away, and then so I took part in caring for him. So I do understand what it's like to be in the middle and to have to care for kids and then also thinking about your older loved one too. And it's a stressful place to be. I would say as a parent, you already have a ton to do, which is also why I'm thankful that you're here tonight. But I hope that what I share with you today is going to really help make your job easier. So I'm also a parent of 3 kids, an aunt of many, and all 3 of my kids are in MCPS schools right now. I have 2 elementary school boys, and then I have a girl who is in middle school. And then finally, my background, once I graduated from college, if my book is in Montgomery County Public Libraries. If you get a chance to read it, basically my background, I graduated from college and I studied business, but I ended up starting my first job at a retirement community, and my entire basically I fell in love with serving the older generation. And that is a lot of what I'm sharing with you today is it's derived from my experience working in the senior care field. I've worked in basically every level of care, from independent living, assisted living, skilled nursing, short-term rehab. And then for almost 9 years, I worked at Montgomery Hospice doing end-of-life care and doing education there. So that is my perspective, where I'm coming from. I hope that you can just take all the things that I'm sharing and apply it to your situation. Again, if you have questions, I'm here to help. So let's just kind of go over the dynamics of intergenerational relationships, because I think a lot of times people ask me questions, but the reality is that every situation is different. Okay. So if you're looking at all these different dynamics, I would love to hear in the chat, in terms of distance, do you have a grandparent who is long distance, or they live nearby, or are they in the same household? Maybe they're down the street. Let me know that in the chat. That definitely changes the dynamics if a grandparent is far away. The distance also affects the frequency of how often an older and younger person may see each other. So a grandchild may not see their grandparent that often. And yes, that would affect how close they are, how close that relationship is. The relationship between parents is another dynamic. And what I mean by that is your relationship as a parent to the grandparent, that affects how the child will relate to their parent. The personalities of kids and grandparents, it definitely affects how that relationship will turn out. And so that's why you may have a very talkative child who gets along really well with their grandparent. Maybe you have a quiet child who maybe it's kind of hard sometimes to help them to relate to their grandparent. So a number of you said, it looks like everybody said that their older loved one, the grandparent, is long distance. And I know, based on experience with a lot of different families, that sometimes that long distance may be overseas too, right? It may be a complete time change, maybe even 12-hour difference. And so that definitely is a dynamic that affects the relationship. Mother-in-law in Northern Virginia, and I see one person said that her kids see their maternal grandma once or twice a year. Once a year and twice a year to see their paternal grandparents. Okay. Well, I know as parents, it can be hard when you don't, number one, when the distance is far and maybe your kids don't see their grandparents as much. And one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this very topic is because I live with my grandparents. And so even if my parents didn't intentionally do anything to help me connect with my grandparents, I lived 26 years in the same household. Literally, when I got engaged, I moved out when I got married. And so I spent over 2 decades living with my grandparents. But for me, my mom and my mother-in-law, who are the two grandparents that are still living, they don't live with my kids. And I want my kids to have that value. I want them to gain from relationships with their grandmothers. But I always think, how can I do that? Right. Um, and so just really quick, I'm going to kind of skim over this, but one of the benefits, and there are so many different benefits, but it's pretty obvious that the more social support that your kids have, the more likely they're going to be able to be resilient. They may be more confident. They'll be able to handle more stressful events. There's even studies saying that the more social support you have, the more people, strong, consistent relationships that you have in your life, the lower levels of depression someone may experience. Their child development may, they're going to be able to develop and have a positive childhood because they have strong social support. And this even affects academic achievement. So I want to, even though many of you, you're mentioning that the grandparent that you have in your family is long distance, I want you to know that they don't have to be best friends to get the benefit of having that intergenerational relationship. There are so many times you hear stories of people talking about their grandparents, and I hear it all the time. People sharing how they really appreciate their grandparents, especially after their grandparents have passed, and they may not have lived with them, but they've observed things about them. Okay, so remember that. Again, I just mentioned that having more support is beneficial and it improves your physical, your mental, your emotional health. Basically, we know that when we give the kids attention, we give them love and support, they do better. I want to also add on a couple of things that you might not have thought about, but I always say that when grandparents are involved in a grandchild's life, and it doesn't even have to be every day, but it allows them to have that extra layer of love and attention. And clearly, all of you are parents who care, who provide love to your kids because you're here. But having grandparents in their lives, integrated into their lives, it gives them that extra layer of love and attention to help them to develop resiliency. I also think that when it comes to grandparents and just older adults in general, it's one of the safest ways for kids to be able to practice social skills. And in this generation where we have all this social media, all this screen time, kids sometimes have a hard time knowing how to relate to other people. But what it does is older adults are a very safe place because often grandparents and older adults are just extremely gracious to younger people. A grandchild can tell their grandparent that their hair looks ugly, and the grandparent will probably laugh. Or just all sorts of stories like that. You think of even babies cry, and if there's an older lady walking by, she'll just all of a sudden she'll peek up and it kind of perks her attention, right? Especially if you're a long distance, having an older person and having a grandparent in your kids' lives, what I see, especially long distance, is that even when you as a parent talk about your parent with the grandchild, with your child, what it does is it helps them to gain a greater appreciation and gratitude for life. And so I can't go into that too much just based on time, but I will, a lot of my resources, you'll be able to get that from there. And then finally, learning about their own family history. It is part of learning about their own identity. So how many of you have kids? I'd love to know whether your kids are in middle school, elementary school, or high school. And just go ahead and write that in the chat. When it comes to teenagers too, sometimes people think, oh, intergenerational relationships, and they're thinking about kids, young kids, and then the older generation. But I really believe that there is so much potential when we are intentional in building younger teenagers and even young adults. building those relationships between the younger generation, that age group, and the older generation, because teenagers, they're more aware of what's going on. So you can be more intentional with them. All right, high school, college, middle school, awesome. So the benefits for you is that when your kids are connected with their grandparents more, it can really be helpful because it can help you. It kind of takes the pressure off of you sometimes. And I think as a parent, I know that my parents are pleased when they connect with their grandchildren. But it's also, as a parent, you are so busy. You have so many different things, not just actual tasks to handle, but you have a lot of emotional, as a mother, I'm the one who, my kids come to me when they have problems. And so you're just handling a lot. And it's nice to have somebody else in that village to help support your child. And a grandparent is a perfect person to do that. Real quick, just for grandparents, if you are caring for the older and younger generation, by connecting, by helping to build those intergenerational relationships, you are also, this is pretty obvious, but you are improving the well-being of your older loved one, of the aging adult. And I've worked with a lot of older adults, but my grandma, my mama, who I live with, we used to say she has 10 great grandchildren, and we used to say that every great grandchild, every baby that we had, she would live an extra year or two. And she lived to 102. So my grandpa passed when he was 98, and my grandma passed when she was 102. But I really do feel like those social connections are just so very important. But it's not just about that relationship, it's about how it impacts an older person and a younger person's well-being. All right, so one helpful reminder, you just think about veggies. Maybe your kids were you can put it in the chat, whatever types of activities they did that they didn't want to do, that you have to push them to do. This is the same case here. My reminder to you is that our children won't always appreciate what is good for them. So while I share some of these tips, I want you to know that even if you don't see the fruit now, doesn't mean that you are not doing a good thing for them, okay? So if you have questions again, please chime in. So we're gonna go over, I think 4 reasons the younger and older generation may not connect. And these are just some things that I see that happen not only in families, but one of the things I do in my business right now is I just met today with a large senior living community in the Montgomery County area, and even senior living communities who they will do things, intergenerational activities. A lot of times they don't incorporate these things that I think are missing. All right, so number one of the reasons why I think the younger generation often may not connect with the older generation is because they don't realize their impact. And what I mean by that is, as a grandchild myself, I didn't realize till I was in my 20s that I could have such an impact on the well-being, and particularly the emotional well-being and just the mood of the house. I had an impact on that, and I could impact the mood of my grandparents. So what I like to tell parents as the connectors is to help your kids realize that they have a superpower. You have kids in middle school, so you might not say a superpower, but help them to realize that they have an impact through really simple gestures. Your children, when we can tell them that they can make a difference, what they do and the way that they relate and the times that they relate with their grandparents, they have the ability to bless them in ways that we cannot as parents. A really great example is I was walking my daughter to school maybe a couple years ago, and I remember I saw an older lady, and this is right after COVID. So I was really thinking about the older population and isolation. And so I saw one of our neighbors and I said, hello. I said, hi, good morning. And I feel like I said it pretty loud, but she didn't respond to me. Then my daughter goes, hello. And she was probably, I want to say she was maybe in 3rd grade. And all of a sudden that lady, this older lady, she responded and said, "Oh, hello." And you could see on her face, she was just very, um, she was so blessed to have a younger person recognize her. And I think it's even that acknowledgement, especially in this world, when a younger person acknowledges their grandparent, that it makes a difference. But the key here is that we help our kids to see that they can make a difference. We help them to realize that can have impact. And then we also help them to realize the need. So when you remind your kids, when you call grandma or when you call your grandpa, and even if you have a 30-second conversation, it really makes a difference because I can tell that she is happier. She is so pleased to know that you just asked how her day was. And this is, there's so many examples of this. And maybe after today, you'll go around and when you see a grandchild walking up to their grandparent, oftentimes you will see their grandparents, their eyes light up. Having worked in professionally with older adults, I used to hear people say, they would see their grandchild and say, my grandson invited me to their football game. And they would just brag about that all month long because they were so honored that their grandchild had recognized and thought of them. So that type of just reminding our children, even when they are not around their grandparent, just saying, you have an impact makes a huge difference. I think kids always want to know why do you do something? And so when you can explain to them the why, and then they can often see that it really does make a difference when they call their grandparent, when they talk to their grandparent, when they pull out the seat, and say, here, grandma, this is where you can sit. It makes a difference. Do you have please let me know if you have any questions about that. And also if you have seen this in your own family, that those small gestures make a huge difference. So one of my favorite quotes to tell people is that grandchildren bless without baggage. So this goes to show you, again, one of the reasons why grandchildren can have such an impact. Often they're oblivious of all the baggage that is often between in families. And that's one of the reasons why I think grandparents really love interacting with them. It's almost like a second try. All right, so what happens when we don't tell our kids, when we don't tell students that they have an impact, that they can bless their grandparents? Well, one, as your parent ages, what happens is they often become a bystander. So I think I hear a lot of grandchildren, and especially in my 20s, I would hear my friends be really sad that their grandmother was getting older and things were harder for her, or him, but they didn't know what to do. And they ended up just watching what was happening. They do not need to watch. When you tell them, hey, you have an impact, and you help them to realize that they have this superpower to bless their grandparent, what happens is they start to see, oh, I can play a role in this. And so for you, if you are a caregiver, especially from afar, what you have just done is you have just added another person to your village to care for your parent, your aging parent. You have just added somebody else to that village, and that takes some pressure off of you. And you've added a very important person, because that person often has the ability to really boost an older person's mood, the grandparent's mood. And we all know that when we're feeling better, our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health is better. They When you don't tell them what their impact is, then your kids start to think that you're just trying to get them to do something just because, and so that's really an important thing to remember. And then finally, I say grandparents, they lack one of the factors, their grandchildren. Their grandchildren are one of the factors that improves their quality of life. So it's so important to help them to see that. The second reason that a lot of times older and younger generations don't connect is because I think the younger generation, no matter how young or old they are, they could be a young adult, they lack understanding. Now, working in the senior care field, one of the things that happened for me is I started working with older adults, and once I did that professionally, I no longer was exposed to just my two grandparents. I started meeting older adults of all kinds. And so my grandparents were pretty healthy, but I started meeting other older adults who used walkers at that time, and they had oxygen tubes, or maybe they had uh, arthritis that was so bad that you could see it in someone's hands, or they had diabetes and you could see their legs were extremely um, they were swelled up. And for me, that could have been a scary experience. But I had people who were training me so that I understood what was happening. So when you help, one of the things that is really important for you as a connector to remember is to help your child to understand what's going on. Now, a lot of you said that your child is a middle schooler. Some of you said even college. Well, guess what? A lot of times we interact with grandparents, and they may interact with grandparents, but if we don't explain to them what's going on, they may be fearful to engage. So, for example, let's say they visit their grandparent in the hospital because you're going to visit, your aging parent, and the reason is because they had a stroke or something happened to them. Well, helping your child understand what a stroke is going to help them to have more understanding, more knowledge, so that they may not be so fearful. They're going to have an idea of what's going on, but they also won't be as afraid. So you really want to make space, create a space, and this may be while you're with visiting, or while you're talking with their grandparent, or a lot of this happens when you're not with your parent. So when the grandchild is not with their grandparent. So let's say your child, the student, is talking with their grandparent on Zoom or video chat. I want to know, what types of things do you usually talk about? Do they talk about with their grandparents? Well, after that conversation, let's say 1 week, they may see their grandparent starting to do things a little slower, or forgetting certain things, or maybe they notice when you have dinner with your parent that their grandparent is limping a little bit. Take those opportunities to explain, and to even, you may have to look up a definition of a certain disease, or you may have to look up a certain health condition. Explain to them what's going on. For example, I put this question: why does she have that tube across her nose? If a child goes and visits and sees their grandparent, and they see an oxygen tube, most likely, if they don't know what it is, they may be scared. Maybe they're thinking, is she gonna die if I accidentally knock that over? And then so they're gonna keep a physical distance. So I'd love to know if you have been in a situation like that, or you see situations now where you could help your child understand what's going on. This is important even for us as adults, to really understand what's going on. I think nowadays too, I've had parents ask me and say that their child is having a hard time because the grandparent has dementia, or they have early onset Alzheimer's. Or they're in the early stages of Alzheimer's. And so a lot of those cognitive issues, that can be really scary for a child if they don't know what's going on. What happens when you don't help explain, when you don't help a child understand what's happening? Well, you end up having a lot of stereotypes, a lot of the ageism that happens out there, a lot of the misconceptions that younger people have of older adults comes from the media. And that's often because we don't take the time to explain to our kids what is really happening. And they end up coming up with their own assumptions if you don't explain to them really what's happening. I also mentioned that they may be fearful of interacting. And so this is a huge piece. As a parent, you are the connector. So help your kids understand, talk with them, and help them understand what's going on. And I would say sometimes you're not going to know the answer, but give them even every time they interact with their grandparent, you might want to say, was there anything that was a little scary for you? Do you have any questions? Do you know what's going on with grandpa? Just to see if they have questions. And this is not just about health conditions, but I would say this is also something that you might do. For example, if one grandparent passes away and the other grandparent starts to act differently, maybe they are maybe they're a little grumpier, or maybe not as patient with their grandchild. It could be because they're grieving. There's a lot of different things out there, and so it's important to have those conversations with your kids. Number 3, one of the reasons why the older and younger generations do not connect, or they don't connect well, is they lack guidance. So we talk about social skills all the time, and we have to be able to often prompt our kids and teach our kids, even provide them with scripts on how to interact with somebody else. The thing about older adults and grandparents is that the older and younger generation, they have so many differences, right? And so when you're trying to help your child to connect with their grandparent, they need guidance, and they need it because they're trying to connect with somebody who is very different from them. So again, I'll bring us back to that example on the playground. You're trying to help your child connect with another child so that they can befriend them, they can become friends. Well, you've got to, I think when one of my sons was younger, I might have said, oh, this boy likes this TV show, he likes Legos, my son likes Legos too. And then that helps them to connect. And so that's basically what we as connectors, we as parents have to do. I'd love to hear if you have a certain situation where you're trying to help your child to connect with their grandparent. I'd love to know if there are certain situations where you've found it hard for them to connect. Some of you said they're long distance, so you may have to prompt and say something. You're the one who is prompting curiosity and prompting conversation. It may be while you're with your child. So it may be at the dinner table, or maybe when they are, you're FaceTiming all together. It may be something where you are going to be the one who says, guess what? The cherry blossoms are budding here. They're coming out here right now. And that may give a chance for the grandparent to comment about that. Or you may say something like, oh, Bobby had a orchestra concert last week, and guess what happened? And then you are prompting the child to be able to get into a conversation with their grandparents. So I've given a couple examples here of what a parent may say, what you as a parent might say, as a way to help your child to connect with their grandparent. Especially, I would say, if they don't live with them, right? I know I do this often because I have some kids who are much more talkative, and they will volunteer information, and they can really make conversation easily. But others who do not, they're maybe more quiet, more introverted. And so I may say something like, did you know that grandpa likes fishing? And that can prompt a conversation where the grandparent can start talking about what they know about fishing. And then if the conversation's still dry, then I may say, well, we went fishing the other day, and Sam, he caught a fish. Do you want to show the fish to your grandparent? And so all throughout, you are prompting, you're trying to build that relationship. And every time you do that, you have just added another building block to this relationship. I will say that it does take practice. So it's okay if doesn't come natural to you in the beginning, especially if you yourself are not super chatty. But one of the great ways that you can prompt conversation is you can talk about yourself, because I think our kids love to hear stories about their own parents. So saying something like, when I was little, I didn't like going to school. You can ask grandma about that. And then that can bring a conversation there. All right. So what happens when we don't prompt our kids. One, no interaction occurs because our kids do not know what to do. So oftentimes I hear parents say, well, how can I get my teenager to talk with their grandparent? I always tell them to FaceTime and then they just don't do anything and they go on their screens. Well, oftentimes it's not just because they don't care, it's because they don't know what to do. They don't know what to talk about. And so what may happen is there's no interaction, or they're going to avoid, they're going to avoid that interaction. Maybe they're going to shy away when their grandparent is around. Um, and then finally, I would say, what happens when you don't prompt them? Well, they can come up with their own communication styles, which will serve as a barrier. They may end up being rude to their grandparent because you're asking them just to talk to their grandparent and they're like, I don't even know what to say. And they're probably not even going to say that to you, but they are going to come up with their own responses. So it's very, very helpful, especially because grandparents are so different. This is not like just helping them make friends on the playground with somebody who has a lot of similarities. This is helping them interact with somebody who's very different than them. All right, so finally, when all else fails, I will say sometimes it does fail, because I think when you are helping to prompt conversations and prompt curiosity around your kids, sometimes they're not, it's something that you as a parent have to do continually to help them to learn it. And we know that it takes time for kids to learn things. It takes time for students to learn things. So basically repetition is key. But one of the biggest reasons why a grandchild may not connect with their grandparent, may not have a strong relationship with them, is because they don't have a positive example to follow. So if you looked at my family situation, one thing that people were often impressed by was the fact that my sisters and we all helped to care for my grandparents as they got older, and they lived a long time. And I will credit my parents, because they actually never told us, you have to be nice to your grandma. You have to come over here and keep her company. You have to go to the hospital and stay with her because she can't speak English. They didn't do that. But what they did is, having lived in a multi-generational household, well, they didn't say anything, but they set an example of what to do. And so in my case, for example, they would respect my grandparents. And I know it was not easy. If you live in a multi-generational household, if you've heard any stories, it can be a nightmare. So as a grandchild, I started catching on to some of the relational difficulties that could occur in a household when you have all different personalities there, right? But what my parents did is they were respectful, and they did not badmouth my grandparents. If they did, they didn't do it in front of me, but they set a very good example. And so this is a picture of my mom and my grandmother, and this is my mom is not the biological daughter, she's the daughter-in-law. And so, but my mom really set a very good example. What happens when you model? What do we need to do to model and help to foster a strong intergenerational relationship? What do we need to do? We need to show our children good communication. And so, although it is hard, as a parent, we already have a lot of things to do, but it is so important that when we talk to the grandparent, that we are talking not only respectfully, but we're not ignoring them. So, I may be cooking dinner and I may be busy, but if if you see grandma sitting in the corner, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to interact, just stopping and saying, hey, do you need anything? Can I get you anything? All of that is modeling behavior for your child. And I would say the same comes with appreciation when you thank them for things and say, thank you so much for paying for dinner, or thank you so much for coming over. I know it was, a long trip for you to get here, to come here and visit us. All of that is, it mirrors, it models for your child how to interact with them. So we want to be good models. We need to be a positive example for them. And so if you're seeing that gap, it's really important to just kind of reflect and see what am I doing that might send them a different message. And finally, I would say assistance and availability. When your parent asks for help or asks and needs help for things, do you start complaining? Well, if you are going to be complaining about the fact that your parent needs help with technology, you can't expect your child to all of a sudden be gung-ho and to be a helpful person, right? And so ultimately, if I know that there are parents of all different personalities, and I definitely have, talked to many families who say, no, you don't know my parent. They are so difficult. If it's hard to love and to respect and honor an older loved one, a parent, my reminder to you is this: your children, when you get older and need help, how are they going to know what to do? The only way they'll know is by seeing what example, they're going to look at the example before them. If they didn't see anything done, they may not do anything. They may not come and help you, if they didn't see respect and honor, then they're not going to know even what that looks like. Their expectations may be very different from what your expectations are. Every single older person wants to have a family that cares and loves them, comes and is willing to, support them. But if we don't model it for our kids, they're not gonna be able to learn it for themselves. And I know that's really tough, especially because a lot of times there is baggage in relationships. There's a lot of things that aren't processed. And I would say, as an Asian American family, right? We on the outside appear very together, but there's always a lot of, I would say, in whatever culture, there's always a lot behind relationships, right? And so when there's a lot of unprocessed grief or a lot of unprocessed emotions, that can affect our relationship with our parents. And furthermore, that can affect the way that your kids will connect with their grandparents. But I think what is special to remind you of is that grandchildren, when I say they bless without baggage, they can often also be a connector that can connect you closer to your aging parent if you have struggles, and if you have a lot of baggage there. So again, I just want to reiterate what happens when we don't model just connecting and honoring and valuing an older, the grandparent. Well, our kids, they lack motivation. You can tell them as much as you want, go talk to your grandparent, go help your grandparent do this. But if they don't see it modeled, if they don't see you walking the walk, then it's going to be, it's very likely they're not going to do it. They're going to lack the motivation. And the second thing is they're going to see no reason to do it. So really, if it comes down to anything, I would say first start with modeling it. Let me know if you have any questions or specific questions in the chat. And finally, I'm just going to, Evelyn, how much time do I have? I just want to make sure I'm aware. I know people are busy, so I was just going to review and then see questions. Okay. All right. So again,
we have 8 more minutes.
Okay, let's just reiterate 4 reasons why students or your kids may not be connecting with their grandparents. Number 1, they don't realize the impact they have. They don't realize, the impact they have. They don't realize that they have this supernatural ability to bless the older person in their life through very simple gestures. They lack understanding. They don't really understand what's going on. They haven't been given a time or a place to even ask questions. Sometimes we're too busy and we forget to do that. Number 3, they lack guidance. They need that prompting from us, right? And they're not getting it. And then finally, they don't have a positive example to follow. So again, I won't go over it, but just, helping them to realize their impact, helping them understand what's going on, prompting them, and then being a good model. That is, I would say those are keys that I don't even see I think that we often forget when we are trying to build that relationship from the older and younger generation. So, my final word to you is, we talk a lot about diversity and helping our kids to understand different cultures. But when we help our kids understand their grandparents, not only are we building this relationship, making our families stronger, but what we're doing is we are teaching them the skills that they need to be able to develop relationships with people who are very different than them. And so you're not just teaching your kids about this one relationship and helping them and trying to make your parents happy because their grandkids are talking to them. You are helping your kids develop I would say, a life skill that they're going to need with this aging population. They're going to need in the workplace. They're going to need when they go to college. They're going to need this everywhere. Just the ability to develop relationships with people who are different than us is something that is applicable everywhere. So I just want to thank you for having me today.